Welcome to KSOK Uncensored. Tonight's very special guest is Scott, the father of Grace, who recently passed at the hands of hospital protocol. Please come on in, Scott. Hi,
Thanks for
Scott.
having
How
me,
are we
Kate.
doing today?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
I have to tell you, I was reading Grace's story, and I immediately was like, "This is so wrong. I have to do something." And then I pulled back and I said, "We are able to do this, and that is get the word out there to the audience that we have." And I'm just so proud of you as Grace's father to really be fighting this fight. It's an uphill battle, especially in the political climate we have right now. And it's amazing what you're doing for her. And I just want you to know I'm very touched by the fight that you are up against right now. And I don't even have words, Scott. Let's I want to just give a little opener here on what happened, and I am going to refer to my notes to make sure that everything is accurate here. But basically, on October 6th, Grace, Scott's daughter, was brought to the hospital for COVID-19 treatment. She did pass on October 13th. Now, there was a lethal combination of drugs given. And I've been doing research on this today and spoke with somebody that I'm a dear friend of mine who is a registered nurse and has worked on COVID floors for the past 2 years. She was given Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine, all within a 30-minute period of time. Now, in looking at those drugs, all of them seem to have this calming, really they're given to calm the brain, calm the body. So why all three at the same time? And I understand, Scott, that's the question. Why? And it's been incredibly difficult for you to receive an answer. And at this point in time, you still don't have an actual why this cocktail of drugs was given to your daughter. Where are we at right now? Where are you at right now with trying to obtain medical records or some type of rationale for this?
Well, that's a great question. So we were fortunate to get all the medical records within a couple weeks after Grace died, and then we started going through them, and with the purpose at that point of having a meeting with the hospital. So we put together a request to meet with the hospital CEO and the doctor on November 8th. We had gone through all the records by then and started to be able to piece it together. And so then I wrote a 15-page letter. My daughter Jessica wrote a 9-page letter. And then we had all the supporting documents. We sent all that to the patient relations with the request for the meeting. And then they denied the meeting on December 2nd. And that's when we went public, where we started the process of going public, filing complaints and then news media, et cetera. Uh, so you asked, where is it at? Well, the
Right.
research. So we had a doctor involved right away to try to make some sense out of it because, all these terms, I couldn't pronounce any of them to start with. Now I know them probably better than most of the doctors. But
Right.
so what she concluded after going through the records, I'll just read it because it's very powerful.
Absolutely.
So this you have to go back to a little bit before the combination of meds. So the combination of meds that you referenced, Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine, were all given in a 30-minute window on Grace's last day. And so specifically, she was on a dose of Precedex that was 14 times the dose that was started. Then she was given 2 doses of lorazepam within 3 minutes of each other, followed by a 2 milligram dose of morphine as an IV push, which means that it was instant. So those three together like that, very very few people could have survived. We we got a hold of an intensivist, which is the doctor that would be able to make this type of judgment call. And he wrote, Scott, I agree the medications killed your daughter. The
Oh
doctor
my
that we
God.
worked with to go through the records, I'm going to back up just a little bit because Precedex really set the stage for this. So you asked, do we know anything from from going through the records? Well, we pieced a lot together because the hospital basically denied any wrongdoing. So, they don't have a reason. The doctor gave us a reason for the morphine in that he called at 6:45 p.m. He gave her the morphine at 6:15. He called us and said, Grace had a good day. I just gave her 2 milligrams of morphine. My wife, Cindy, and I asked why. And he said, well, her breathing was at 51 breaths a minute and I needed to slow it down. And so we didn't think anything of it, thought, he's the doctor. But
Right.
so that's the only explanation that we had. So then you start digging and think, okay, well, what's going on here? I'm not a real trustworthy person in the hospital. And, so that's why one reason I was an advocate. Of course, I was an advocate because my daughter had Down syndrome, but the things that they did make you very distrusting. And if we have time, I can go through a couple of examples. But this Precedex idea
Absolutely.
is really, really important to set the stage because 4 days before Grace died, they started Grace on a low dose of Precedex. So Precedex is a CNS, a central nervous system sedative. So it works in the
Okay.
brain to slow everything down. There was absolutely no reason for this for Grace. I mean, Down syndrome children are, they're just naturally calm, and Grace was calm. They they started this. So Grace died on the 13th. So they started this on the 9th, and I was still in the room then, so I didn't know that they started this Precedex. They started on a low dose, zero point 0.1 units. So we don't know if it was milliliters or what units means because we don't the hospital records didn't disclose that, but it's still relative. So she started on 0.1 units. Then on the midnight of her last day, they had that dose at 8 times the dose from 4 days earlier. Now, Precedex and all these drugs have a rule of engagement called a package insert. Every drug that is provided by medical staff has a package insert, which is the rules they have to follow. The Precedex package insert says that it's only supposed to be used for 24 hours. So they were already in violation of the package insert. So now she's on
Wow.
four
So
days,
let me just,
4 days,
can I just clarify? They were using Precedex since day one?
not day one. Um, day one, uh, the first day in the hospital, they did use Precedex at my agreement. I I approved it because we were wrestling with Grace to get the BiPAP situation, and she was
Sure.
she was pretty restless. But I mean, I approved it for
Right.
that event, and then they took her off of it, um, and then they put it back on. So I mean, she had the day off of it. They had her on her for a few hours to settle her down that first night, and then and I approved that, and then took it off, and which was fine. I thought she was still off of it, but they
Right.
put it back on. As I've connected the dots, I believe they put it back on because as soon as a patient is on a sedative, which that's what Precedex is, the room
Right.
gets classified from a regular room to an ICU room. So now they get a government bonus, a COVID bonus
Oh.
for classifying it as an ICU room. Furthermore, and maybe more important than that classification is that any patient that's sedated, the hospital can deny your right to take the patient out of the hospital. So now they're locked in there. So now we get to
Wow.
Grace's last day. She they already had her up to zero point 0.8 units, so 8 times the amount at midnight. And if you walk through the day and what happened, now the doctor called us at 8 o'clock in the morning. So this is on October 13th, Grace's last day. And he told us Grace had a good day yesterday. And I think we should put a feeding tube in. And, the purpose of a feeding tube is to get Grace nutrition. Well, she could
Right.
have got nutrition just by feeding her, but they refused to feed her. We we foolishly agreed to the feeding tube, and I'm going to put that aside in the timeline for a minute because At this point, Jessica was the advocate. I was taken out by an armed guard on October um, October 10th, Sunday the 10th. So now Jessica stayed overnight on the 12th. She got up on the 12th and she wanted to take a shower. There's a shower in Grace's room. They told her you can't take a shower in the room. When I was in the room, they said I couldn't leave the room, so I had to take a shower in the room. So Jessica runs home quick. She comes back inside of an hour, and she overhears two doctors in the hallway say that the parents aren't going to like this, and so she says, "What aren't they going to like?" And what what they told her is that we put Grace in restraints, strapped her down to the bed because she wanted to get up and go to the bathroom. So that was another excuse then that they used to increase the dose of Precedex. So Grace becomes almost completely out of it. Now they put a feeding tube in, so now she's, you mean, think about getting a feeding tube in. She's agitated at that point. So now they ratchet up by 10:48 in the morning. They're at 14 times the dose, the original dose, 1.4 units. Then at 10:25, or excuse me, 11:25, they did the first dose of lorazepam. At 5:46 and 5:49, they did two doses of lorazepam back to back, and at 6:15, the morphine. So at that point, at 6:15, she had Precedex at 1.4 units, the two doses of lorazepam, and then the morphine. So
Oh
when I
gosh.
see it, you start wondering what's the reason why. And we'll come back to that because I want to finish out this story so you can connect the dots. Um, so anyway, that answers your question as to what do we know about the meds, and
Oh,
we can go on to finish that day out if you'd like to do that next.
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, there
Sure,
were a few, I do have a few questions for you because I was thinking,
sure.
I was looking at the feeding tube piece and I was like, oh, she must have been intubated. But it sounds like she was not intubated
Oh,
and
he
they
was not
still were
intubated.
going to go with the feeding tube?
Well, they were going with the feeding tube because that's one of the stories I'll share with you. I mean, it's such a strange environment in that hospital. So on October 9th, Grace didn't eat much on the 8th. She got up on the 9th. She's hungry. She had a BiPAP mask on, so I ordered, she told me what she wanted off the menu. I ordered it and I started feeding her. And, it's not that she can't feed herself. Grace was high functioning. Grace rode a horse, drove a car, played violin. Grace
Wow.
was very high functioning, but, she couldn't feed herself with that BiPAP on. So I started feeding her. The nurse comes running in. You can't do that. I said, well, why can't I do that? And she said, well, the oxygen saturation is at 85%. And so because I made the decision to stay with Grace in the hospital, which of course you're going to, I knew I was going to, or I expected, I didn't know for sure, but I expected I was going to catch COVID from her. So I had all of my COVID things in there, the ivermectin and all the thing, and
I-
the oxygen saturation meter. And so then I put the oxygen saturation meter on her finger and it read 95. So I called the nurse back in and I said, my meter reads 95. Is it accurate? She said, yes. I said, well, how come I said, why does my $50 meter read accurate, but your $50,000 machine doesn't read it
Yeah.
accurately? And she said, the leads get sweaty. So they're talking about the leads that were
Mm,
on Grace's finger. I said, well, if you know that, think what's happening. This is the primary measurement you're using for my daughter's care. So if you know that,
right.
why don't you proactively change these leads out every 3 4 hours or whatever it takes so you have accurate reading. And she snottily responded, you should just be thankful that you caught this. uh, so this
Wow.
struggle with there was multiple of these battles ultimately leading to me being taken out by an armed guard. I mean, it wasn't a physical battle, but I mean, the armed guard or the head nurse said 3 shifts of nurses don't want you in the room. Well, of course they don't want somebody challenging. And it's I've come to
Right.
believe it's all part of an agenda. Um, this, it just there's too many coincidences and circumstantial evidence to, to not think it's
Right.
anything but that.
Oh,
So, you know,
absolutely. I have to tell you, Scott, when I spoke to my friend who is the RN and has been on COVID floors for 2 years, I said, is there any reason that the medical power of attorney and father should have been removed by an armed guard. And he said, only if there's like visiting hours that have expired and somebody refuses to leave. He's like, other than that, that shouldn't happen. And so I am curious, and not that I think that's right. I think you should be able to be right by somebody's side 24/7 to be their advocate. You need an advocate in the hospital. Like that's just
Absolutely.
even before all of this COVID nonsense. But was it within visiting hours and it was just literally they didn't want you in there because you were in their way and you actually asked them questions?
Exactly. This confrontation with the nurse was one of many. So, ultimately, this combination of meds. I just want to finish that off. I started saying I wanted to read the doctor's quote, but I needed to give you the backstory of Precedex. So this is from the doctor who helped us go through the records and sort things out right after we got them. She wrote, um, Precedex is a med used for anesthesia to put people to sleep for surgery and procedures. Depending on the dose, it can induce a coma level sleep. Each of these meds, Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine, on their own, have an increased risk of serious or life-threatening breathing problems and cardiac arrest. And there's an additive effect when used in combination. To use them as they did in a person with a diagnosis of acute respiratory distress is beyond believable as to intention. And I'm going to give an exclamation point to that because I referenced the package insert. So the package insert for morphine has what's called a black box label. These are the absolute have-tos. The black box label says that you're not supposed to, and this is really what the doctor said, you're not supposed to use morphine with a benzo, which is lorazepam, or a CNS depressant, which is Precedex, because it can cause death. And if you
Wow.
use morphine regardless, you're supposed to have the reversal drug at bedside because of problems using morphine. Well, they didn't have the reversal drug at bedside. In fact, what happened after this lethal dose was given at 6:15, remember the doctor called us at 6:45. Then my daughter Jessica, who is now the replacement advocate, she called us at 7:20. She's on FaceTime. My wife and I are watching, and she's saying, "Dad, Grace's numbers are dropping like crazy." And I said, "Get the nurses in." She said, "I already tried. They won't come in." At this point,
Oh,
she estimated roughly 30 nurses in the hallway because it was shift change. So now we start hollering, "Come and save our daughter." And they holler back to us from the hallway, "She's DNR. Do not resuscitate." And we say, "She's not DNR. Save our daughter." This is the first that we knew she's DNR. Jessica, afterward, I'm just going to read this. Uh, I have almost 500 hours of research. That's why I have all this paperwork. I mean, I've
oh
got
my
everything
gosh.
so wondering why this DNR situation, she said she wrote one nurse read off what the computer stated and that the doctor labeled her as a DNR, which they claimed they couldn't do anything about. So the doctor put a DNR order on Grace. The DNR statute is statute 154 in Wisconsin, several subsections, but they violated three subsections with that. Number one is the power of attorney, which wasn't me, it was my wife, was supposed to sign any DNR order. So that didn't happen. We didn't know there was a DNR order. Number two,
Wow.
they're supposed to put a bracelet on anybody that has a DNR order. There was no bracelet. Number three, and most important with the fact pattern I just gave you, is that the patient or the advocate or power of attorney can override any DNR, even if the patient put it on themselves by saying, "Revive me," or "Come and save her." That those us telling them to do that overrides the DNR that the doctor put on, but they would not come in the room. In fact, it actually gets worse than that. There was an armed guard posted outside the room, and it gets even worse than that. When so now after Grace died, I drove my wife to the hospital. I couldn't come in because I had COVID. So she's
Oh,
up there. Our pastor met us there. And as the pastor's wheeling my wife out in the wheelchair, one of the nurses has got Grace's belongings on a cart wheeling them out. And she said to my wife, "Me and some of the other nurses don't think Grace should have died today."
oh wow.
So now
Wow,
you put
that's
this all,
powerful.
I know it's powerful. You put it together and you think, what the heck was going on? So now, you start. you start reading and you read things about rationed care and the money. Um, and Grace was on Medicaid. She had, because she had Down syndrome, she has a disability. She's on Medicaid. So the ration care idea is coming from the elites. They want to take out the older people in the population, what they call the deplorables. So Grace is
Right.
in the deplorable category from the people that don't care, that are making the decisions, who run this country. And I've come to the belief that that's why she was taken out. The day that she was taken out, the hospital capacity of bed, they were at 100% capacity. So we would not approve a ventilator, which she didn't need a ventilator. She was never close to needing a ventilator. And
Right.
so the amount of money they were making on Grace was a fairly low amount. And they had people in the emergency room stacked up like cordwood. So I, in my humble opinion, they took out Grace because of uh, the combination of rationing care to the deplorables and the money involved. This deplorable idea is not a joke either. This last weekend, I spent many hours. I combed through all the records one more time, actually two more times, and they referenced the fact that Grace was not vaccinated 6 times in the records. Um,
Really?
they referenced that she had Down syndrome 36 times in the records.
Oh my gosh.
Um, in this quote I'll give you from the COVID expert, so the person in charge of the COVID care on that floor of the hospital, what he wrote in his report from October 8th really tells you what they were thinking relative to Grace's care. This is a quote right out of his report. He said, he, the father, me, believes in the frontline doctor stuff and does not really believe or trust us here in the healthcare setting, which I think is going to be the detriment to his daughter, to be honest.
Wow. That's in the medical charts?
Yeah, that's right in the report.
Oh my goodness.
This isn't my opinion I'm talking about.
Wow.
It's,
It's wild to think. I mean, it's like it's like so many people. I talk to people all day long about what's happening right now, and we speculate, right? We're constantly thinking what you're telling me right now and exactly what your daughter went through and what you've gone through in your family. We're like we're speculating that that's likely happening, but to actually hear and have it confirmed that that is the
well,
experience,
it
it's
really happened,
terrifying,
and we were in the
heartbreaking.
room. Yeah, I mean, hardly anybody in the entire country has been in the room because they have this shroud of secrecy. They tell you, well, the hospital policy doesn't allow you in the room. Well, we were in the room, so these have become facts, and that's what makes um, this is quite a unique case. Uh, it's
Right.
unique because of my daughter, but I mean, she's the motivation of going public with this. We want to help save people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that is just horrifying. I have and Scott, I just want to pause again. I as you were telling your story, I'm like fighting. Not that there's anything wrong with crying, but I just want you to know I feel this raw emotion because I can't even begin to put myself in the position that you're in. And so I'm just so sorry. Sorry,
Well, thank
Juan.
you. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes
Woo!
I can't
But
get
it's,
through it. I can't get through it myself, but I'm okay right
oh,
now, thankfully. But it's tough.
wow. And I can't help, I have like I mentioned before we started recording, I have a daughter who has epilepsy and she's had two brain surgeries. And like to think about, to just even like put myself in the position of not being, I mean, we were able, thank God, we were able to be like right by her side 24/7. Because most of it was before all of this COVID nonsense and all the protocols. But to, and believe me, I know from, early on when she was being diagnosed with epilepsy, like you said, you're like an expert on on terminology now. And you could like, you do as a parent, you read through everything because you find that that you have to be the advocate. It's wild how much you have to be the advocate, and I completely agree. Like I don't just trust hospitals anymore at all. Like you have to do what you were doing. And Scott, I just want to say I heard you say this a few times that you gave them the okay on this, and I know you're likely, feeling it maybe in some sense responsible for some aspects of it. Gosh, don't do that. Right? Like just if you're doing that, don't do that. You're fighting. Look at what you're doing right now. You're fighting like heck for Grace and getting her story out there. So and you're doing it so that other people don't have to suffer the same grief you are and your daughter did. And so I just really want to commend you on that. And we want to help you as much as possible getting the word out. And this is a real eye opener. And I actually have somebody, one of my girlfriends I've known since kindergarten, her uncle just passed, and there were very questionable circumstances in the or things like this that were happening in the hospital. And her they're going to go public with it soon too, and that's in the state of Washington. And it's absolutely terrifying and so horrible that you just went through this. And there's so many untold stories out there right now too. And
Well, there's tens of thousands of these stories.
uh,
Uh,
right.
Unfortunately, most people, you just think about their thought processes. Well, my dad or my grandpa went in for COVID, and he died of COVID in the hospital, and they never think about getting the records. They just take what the hospital told them as the truth. Um, and it's simply not the truth. When you start, some of them I'm sure did die of COVID, but I would say, based on what we put together, that is the minority share. Grace did not die of COVID. Grace went into the hospital with low oxygen as a result of COVID, and I went into the hospital 3 days after Grace died with symptoms about 3 times worse than her. And the difference was, of course, I lived, but I didn't live because of, I would have died at St. Elizabeth's Hospital too, where she died. But I went into a different hospital in Green Bay, and they followed a completely different protocol. And I just about died the first night. That's how bad I was. Where Grace went into the hospital, she was great. And
Wow.
within 24 hours, I knew I was going to live because their protocol was completely opposite of what was used on Grace. So the protocol is what killed her. Just in general, I mean, they're following this COVID script, but then you throw in these meds and a unilateral DNR, and of course, then you start really wondering what the heck was going on. Just because
I
people would be wondering, I mentioned about frontline doctors. I mean, I believe in
mm,
that. I believe in it wholeheartedly. Grace and I. So you think, well, why did we end up in the hospital if we're following that protocol? Well, the reason is if on our website, so our website is ouramazinggrace.net. We have a link to Dr. Chetty. He's a South African doctor. If you're interested in really drilling it down, he's probably invested more time than any doctor in the entire world figuring this out. And he has concluded that there's a certain percentage of the population that has a genetic propensity to produce inflammation and clotting. And that's what I believe. Grace inherited that from me. And I've had a clotting issue known before and an inflammation issue. And so both of those Grace likely inherited. And so my wife had COVID too. She didn't end up in the hospital. We all had it at the same time. And
oh
so
wow.
Grace and I ended up there, and you can't prevent that. You, if I knew then what I know now, Grace wouldn't have gone into the hospital. We would have still went to the emergency room. But then what we would have done is checked out and got a prescription for oxygen and a steroid, and Grace would have recovered at home. But at that point, I didn't know that. So one take
Right.
home message from this conversation is, it's just because I went into the hospital and Grace did, and we're on the frontline protocol. Take what we learned. I mean, so this doesn't happen. Neither Grace
Right.
or I had to go check into the hospital. We did because we didn't know we could get prescribed oxygen at home at that point.
You Scott, I didn't know that either. And actually, it's that's very interesting that you said that, because I was talking to my husband and I was like, this is when my girlfriend was telling me about her uncle, and I said, it makes me want to go buy oxygen tanks and have them at my house. Like, seriously. I didn't
And
know
you
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 could get a
actually can.
prescription.
Well, you can't get tanks at home, but you can get an oxygen generator at home. I bought one off
Okay.
of Amazon after I learned of this. You can get your own oxygen at home. It's just not in a tank. You really wouldn't want the tank
Okay.
tanks. I had tanks after I got out for 2 months, and you burn through an oxygen tank too fast. You need a generator, so it's making oxygen. Um,
Very
the tanks,
interesting. I had no
tanks
idea.
are really, yeah, they're just for portable use.
I see. Okay. That's really good to know. My husband's going to be like, oh, great, she's buying something else. Every time I learn something new, I'm like, oh, I'm buying it. Oh gosh. But seriously, I mean, it's not, it's something that I think people should really look into having in their household. Um, I had no idea until just, just now that you could get a prescription. And it's wow, yeah. I mean, we just can't put the trust in the hospitals anymore. I have to ask you, Scott, because my friend, I was asking about the DNR, and
Yes.
especially so because your daughter had Down syndrome, so naturally you were the medical power of attorney, and so naturally they should be referring to you before placing that. My again, my friend, my source, he said yes, that should not be, that should not have happened. You can't, a doctor on their own cannot, according to him, just puts, make somebody DNR. Has anyone, what are people in the hospital saying about that? Like, why is is it different state to state, or how do you just make
Well,
somebody
I mean,
DNR without referring to the family?
yeah, I mean, technically, my wife was the first power of attorney and I was second, but that doesn't matter. I mean, she should have had to sign it. But regardless of that, what the hospital uses the excuse is they claim that the discussion that we had with the doctor um, regarding a ventilator, so that's called DNI, do not
Right.
intubate, not DNR, do not resuscitate. So we requested do not intubate on purpose. Um,
Right.
and the reason is they wanted to put a ventilator in Grace the second day, and
Of course they did. That is horrible.
and it's terrible. And what they how they couched this request for the ventilator was that we want you to decide ahead of time because this is how they would say it. These type of things tend to happen in the middle of the night when we can't get a hold of the parent. So we want to be able
Oh,
to do this, just in case. Well, just in case to them is based on the financial gain. It isn't based on what the need is. And
wow.
I the what I witnessed in the hospital is proof to that. I mean, they're arbitrarily lowering Grace's oxygen, as I said before, because they don't have accurate leads. When I combed the bill that they sent to Medicaid for Grace, remember I challenged the nurse about these leads. They replaced the leads in 7 days. They replaced the leads 3 times. They billed Medicaid for $234 for 3 lead replacements in 7 days. You know,
Oh,
that's crazy. They should have been
yeah.
replaced. It's so. I mean, they already were arbitrarily lowering her oxygens on the charts, and it wasn't as low as what they said. And then they put her on Precedex. Why? Because they're setting her up for a ventilator.
Right.
She
Right.
she was
Exactly.
never at that. She was never at that point. The other example I could share with you just to prove the point is the on October 8th. This is Grace's second day in the hospital. A doctor came in at 8 o'clock in the morning and said, Grace, your daughter is going to have to go on a ventilator in the next 2 hours. I said, what is that based on? And he said, the blood gas, which is a certain draw they do, the blood gas numbers from last evening. I said, well, what time were the blood gas numbers drawn? And he said at 11:30. And remember, I told you about getting the BiPAP on Grace. Well, we had just got done working with her on that, and I said, I don't think those numbers are accurate. I said her blood pressure was 235 over 135, and her heart was racing at 150 beats a minute because we were wrestling
Wow.
with this BiPAP. And so I
Right.
said, I want you to retake the numbers. And so they retook the blood gas numbers, and of course she was fine. I mean, so he wanted me to make the decision on the ventilators based on faulty numbers. Fortunately,
Oh
I
my
challenged.
goodness.
I mean, this
That
stuff, that's the
it just
difference between
wow.
having an advocate. Think about if there's not an advocate in the room. So, of course, she'd already been on a ventilator. So I want to just nail this for your audience. So if you have a combination of COVID bonus payments, the average bonus payment from the government to the hospital per COVID patient is 100 grand. So you have a combination of money, immunity from liability. So the doctors, all the medical staff have immunity from liability. So we don't have a practical leg to stand on for suing them because they're immune from liability. And then lack of advocacy. So now we were in the room and look what happened. So now COVID bonus, immunity from liability, lack of advocacy. Now just process how many people they can kill that way.
Oh,
They get a
that
thirteen
is a
thousand dollar
recipe for
bonus.
disaster.
It's a
So,
recipe for disaster.
I just real quick, I want to ask you, Scott. Because I was thinking about that. I'm like, I wonder if there's litigation happening right now. Why are they not held responsible? Is it just because of the COVID protocols and government backing, or why is there a lack of accountability?
Well, COVID's been used for an excuse for all kinds of things. So I mean, there's
Right.
even beforehand, the state statutes really limited the liability claim. Because Grace was 19, she's a legal adult. So then most most claims are based on loss of companionship. Once somebody's an adult, there's no loss of companionship. So that got rid of that
Mm,
claim. The malpractice claim, this is clearly malpractice. But we talked with probably the best malpractice attorney in the state, and he said, there's a statutory limit of 750,000. And so I said to him, well, what's the reason there's a limit? And the lobbyists for the doctors have gotten the limits put in place in almost every state in the country under the idea that if doctors can be sued, you're not going to get people to practice medicine. So they have this
wow.
limit.
Okay.
And furthermore, the limit is uh, the attorney can only take 33 and a third percent. So the family gets the balance. So I said to him, we're not after any money. What if I just sign over our 66 and 2/3 percent? He said, you can't. State statute doesn't allow you to sign over your percentage. So,
Okay.
and then the third piece of that, he said, even in slam dunk cases like this appears to be, there's only a 1 in 10 chance because these doctors circle the wagons around their own. They come out to protect their own. Ascension
Right.
Hospital System is part of the system that Grace died in. They have 26 billion in cash. They're huge.
Yeah.
You can't fight
They're
you can't fight
untouchable.
them,
No.
right? So
Oh,
they're not
the
untouchable if
system
you
is
can
so
band together.
broken. What a broken
Right?
system. Seriously. Lack of
It's really
accountability.
broken.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and I'll just put this out there. There's a series that's called Doctor Death, and it really hits home how difficult it is to hold a doctor responsible. And I know there's amazing doctors and nurses out there, but there are a lot there are some that are not good, and they've lost. It's like they're no longer human. They're just a machine, and to hold them accountable, hold them responsible, it is nearly impossible. And watching that series on Dr. Death, it's like it was real stories about real people, real doctors, and nothing was happening. And so really really scary stuff. So we have to be our own advocate and our advocate for our family members now more than ever. And Scott, I
Yes.
really appreciate you getting the story out there. I know this is beyond difficult, beyond what you can even wrap your brain around, like myself. But what you're doing right now is likely saving lives, and I just really appreciate the time that you've spent. Would you say 500 hours of research, and that's you're not done. You're doing interviews daily. I mean, you're doing so much, and so I really admire you for what you're doing for your daughter.
Don't admire me. I mean, I sense God is behind this, and of course, my daughter Grace, I'd do anything for her. So,
Yeah.
I'm just I'm just the one that got picked to do this, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do so, and I'm humbled by the media, that the interest, and of course very thankful. This is the least that we could do to honor our daughter.
Oh, well, Scott, I hope you don't mind. You'll be in my prayers because that's really heavy and touching. And I just want to give you a hug, and I can just tell you're such a nice person. So just thank you for your time, and it's really nice to have met you.
Well, nice to meet you too, Kate. Thank you.
All right, keep fighting.
Will do.